Okay, bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everyone. Um, uh, our HP update for January. A reminder que la réunion est premièrement en anglais, mais si vous en avez des questions, tu peux poser tes questions de la langue de votre choix. Um, and I'm getting a little smile from Andréane on my translation. So it's a good way to start today. Um, we do have a camp on right behind me in the gym. So if there's any extraneous noise, I apologize. All right, let's get right into it. So just a reminder, we are a welcoming environment in Boxing Canada. We try our best. And related to that, I just want to remind everyone that we do have, as part of the Canada Cup coming up in Montreal, an Indigenous only novice competition as well. So if you have any Indigenous boxers who've been having a hard time finding novice competitions for, I think this would be a great environment to do that in. And I know that we've got some interest already from Ontario and from Atlantic Canada in coming in with some of their Indigenous boxing members of our boxing family. So fantastic opportunity. If you need any more information, there's stuff available in the handbook for the, pardon me, for the championships and for the Canada Cup. Okay, today we're going to go over a little bit of where we're at with our karting. We'll do a where we're at with our national team plan now that we're finally into 2026. We'll talk a little bit about the two camps that are going on presently, and then what the next opportunities are that are coming up. So that's BoxAm, and we've got an update on what we're doing with our B Tour because we've had some changes that we've updated in the NTP. We'll talk a little bit about nationals and then a little bit of discussion around the data that we collected over last year, looking at training volumes for athletes and what we see out of the collected data, where we think some of that data is incomplete, and some inferences that I think we can draw from comparing to other sports. And of course, we finish off with sort of a look at our upcoming calendar. So a quick reminder that we do have this pathway to the Olympics available on our website, and it's linked in the NTP. And essentially it goes from qualify at your provincial level, get yourself to either a national championships or one of our assessment camps, get categorized through that experience, and then that puts you on pathway to be able to compete internationally at various levels. And then once you've competed internationally successfully, then we get into our actual Olympic qualification, which is an international set of qualification standards. They're not our standards. And to be clear, the easiest way to do that is to be a top two at the World Championships in 2027. And a reminder, I think we're at 900 days, right? It's just about 900 days until the opening ceremonies in LA. So this is coming up fast. But the 2027 World Championships will be in the first half of 2027. You get a top two there in an Olympic weight category, and you are locked in. It is registration by name locked in for the Olympics. If you haven't qualified there, the next best opportunity is at the Pan Am Games in 2027, which is later in 2027. So top two there, and that was, to remind everyone, where our two athletes qualified for the games in Paris. And then we know that there will be two Olympic qualifiers, both in 2028, early in the season, and you get a top two at either one of those, and you get your registration by name at the Olympics. So Canada is gunning for at least two athletes qualified for the Olympics. We would love to take a larger team than that. And of course, we are targeting a podium while we're in LA. So looking ahead to the high performance plan. So this is just an update on that long-term plan. It's available for everyone to look at. We do make updates to it periodically, but the updates are not really significant. We do little edits here and there, but we have mapped out sort of year by year what our goals are for each one of our programs. So we break down by world-class categorized athletes, podium potential categorized athletes, emerging national squad, U19, and then sort of what our overall focus is for our A and B squads. I think the big takeaways for the 2026 season is that the continental championships are extremely important. We feel that despite the fact that they are not a direct qualifier for the Olympics, they are a really, really good simulation of the competitive field we are going to see at the Pan Am Games next season. And because of that, because it's going to be the same people in the same weight categories, it's a great opportunity to see how you stack up against the competition. And, you know, if you do well at these continental championships, it's going to set you up well for the Pan Ams. So we really think it's super important. We also want to emphasize we are chasing world ranking points. And the reason why that is critical is because if we can get highly seeded athletes at the World Championships and at Pan Am Games, it just makes that Olympic qualification pathway slightly easier. I mean, we all know that in boxing, like the draw doesn't mean everything, but it doesn't mean nothing either, right? So if we can improve our opportunity to do well in the draw and have highly seeded athletes in competition, we're going to take every opportunity we have in order to make that happen. The other two takeaways are medals, of course, are important, right? And particularly in lower levels of international competition, we want to see athletes going long in the tournament because it is good practice for when we are at our major qualification competitions where we know that you're going to have to go 4 rounds in order to get one of those top 2 places at the World Championships, at Pan Am Games, or at one of the qualification tournaments. And then also the U19 this year. So U19 World Championships is an important opportunity for our young athletes to go and experience high quality international competition. It's also important that they are able to demonstrate that they can peak their performance at an international competition. So, you know, it's great to do well here at home. It's great to do well at nationals, but we need athletes who have the ability to peak mid-season at specific times and sort of are able to execute on their YTP effectively. So it really is important. And because it's so important, you'll see when we talk about our NTP, we are providing additional opportunities this year for our U19 athletes to be well prepared for their chance to go and to the World Championships. So looking at our updates that we've done. So we've updated the document and we've updated the flow chart. We're going to see quickly some of the updates to the flow chart in just a second, but I'll just talk about what our latest updates are. So we had been gearing pretty heavily on the B Tour going to World Challenge Cup events. World Boxing has, I'll say, reprioritized their efforts this year, and the establishment of that series has been lower down on the priority chart for them. So what we have done is we have gone and said, look, we're not going to have a World Challenge Series this year. So what are the equivalent events that will have a high degree of competitiveness where our B team can go for competitive opportunities that will count towards selection, will count towards carding. So we've identified 4 events, starting out with the Boxam tournament, then going on to GB, then going on to Eindhoven, and then going over to the Copa Americana. So those are now part of our system. It's locked into the NTP. We will be sending teams. What we don't know, and we don't think will happen at this point, is that there will be no world ranking points associated with those events. And we are working with, wherever possible, World Boxing to make sure that eventually we do have a proper B Tour that is recognized by World Boxing that does have world ranking events points associated with it. The 2 other big changes are we've got continental championships. We know when those are now. I didn't mark it on this slide, but we'll see it in a second. And they will be in Mexico. So it's nice that we don't have to go too far for them. They're outside of Mexico City. It's at a fairly high elevation, which will have impact on our preparations. But we're pretty happy that Mexico is hosting, and kudos to Mexico. They're putting on a number of international events this year. Unfortunately, we're not able to participate in all of them because they conflict with some of our domestic stuff. But we're very thankful for them putting on the Continental Championships, and we really look forward to taking a large team down there. And then the last one is Elite National. So in Cape Breton, we had thought that this was going to be slightly later in the month of November, but it is going to be the 3rd to the 8th. We just confirmed that yesterday with the organizing committee. They did move us up a little bit simply because they've got a massive curling tournament that's happening later in the month, and they wanted to make sure that they were going to have their full attention available for boxing when we're there. So we've got those updates. And I'm not going to zoom this because, of course, this is linked in a bunch of places and people can get to it. But I want to point out two things, and that's the first is we've picked out those B Tour dates, and so they show up as sort of this. It's actually coming up in 2 weeks in February, and then early April at the GB tournament for the B Tour, and then late May in Eindhoven for the B Tour, and then for anyone who doesn't make it to the Commonwealth Games, and we know that we've only got 6 start spots at Commonwealth Games, so there will be a number of both A team and B team who aren't going to be able to go, unfortunately. We do have the Copa Americana in Colombia that we've added onto the B Tour. So we're pretty excited that we've got a lot of opportunity there, and we really see this as preparation for athletes who are still interested in qualifying for the Olympics in 2028, but also more opportunities for athletes who might still be a little young for qualification, may not quite be up to the level of performance that's required, but will be excellent preparation for them in looking forward towards 2032 and the Brisbane Olympics. And while I've got this up, I just noticed we've also gone and said, look, how can we, within our sort of generalized yearly training plan for the majority of our athletes, capitalize on some of these B Tour opportunities? So what we've done is we've created these linked A and B Tour camps that are happening in Montreal, one of them before the GB tournament, where we'll have both the A team and the B team in camp together, and then again in July. So the athletes who are preparing to go to Commonwealth Games and the athletes who are preparing to go to the Copa Americana will both be in Montreal for pre-camp at the same time. So it'd be nice that we've got a larger group of athletes who can work together in our centralized training environment in order to have proper preparation. Then I'm going to move on from there, unless Chris, do you have any questions? No?
Nope.
All good. Okay.
Oh, good.
I'm going to move on from there to just a quick review of how we got to the training camps that are going on this week and into next week. So the first camp, of course, for U17, U19, and Youth Olympic Games selection. So we were taking invitations went out to the top 4 athletes in U17 and U19 from nationals in 2025. Then we had a short list of athletes who were invited directly by the HPD. And then we had provinces had the opportunity to say, look, I've got this athlete who we think is, gangbusters. We'd really like them to come in and have the experience at the camp. So we relied on our provinces to throw in a little bit more guidance. We've got the schedule for that camp up and available. We're on our first day of sparring right behind us right now. And we have been live streaming the non-sparring sessions. So a long live stream was available from yesterday. We're going to be live streaming some of the afternoon activities today, and then we'll be live streaming, I think tomorrow is pretty much all sparring, so we don't have a live stream on, but then Sunday, on the last day of camp, we've also got some live stream that'll be going up. So we're not doing this necessarily because we want to have people sitting riveted on the edge of their seats eating popcorn watching a camp. The reason we're doing it is because we want to be absolutely transparent about what's going on. Plus, because on the schedule, you've got a little bit of information about what the actual technical work is, coaches and athletes who aren't at the camp can go and take a look at that schedule with the exact workouts and take a look at the recordings of the live stream and be able to match up. Oh, this is what it looks like when they're doing this particular drill or this particular exercise. So we think it's a great way to be transparent about what we're doing, throw out some more information for our coaches and athletes about the technical work that we're doing, and of course for moms, dads, uncles, grandparents, club mates, to be able to see their boxers here in the national training environment is always a thrill. When we look to our elite camp in January, the selection criteria was a little bit more tight. We're not looking for quite as many athletes that we had at the youth and junior camp. So we said all identified world-class podium potential emerging and national squad athletes in both the elite and U23 categories got an invite. And then invitations were sent out to other athletes based on our internal scan of the environment. Say someone missed elite nationals and they missed an opportunity to be categorized, but we feel like, hey, there's a special reason why you should be there. Then we put out a handful of other invitations. We also looked at where we didn't have identified training partners based on who actually accepted their spots for the camp. And we have invited specific athletes in to make sure that we've got proper training partners for people. So we're going to do the same thing. We've got the schedule up and available for everyone to look at. We'll continue updating that as we need to. And then we'll be live streaming certain sessions out of there. Again, not streaming the open sparring, but trying to live stream as much as we possibly can. And for any of the athletes who are invited to that but still haven't registered, because we know there are a few out there, it's a free registration for this one. There's no cost associated with it, but it is important that we get your name down officially because that helps with access to the facility and stuff. Because there is a desk, a very well-intentioned receptionists who are trying to make sure that only people who are supposed to be in the National Training Center are in the National Training Center. Yep. Question,
How do
Chris?
I get myself on that list, Chris, for next week?
Oh, just throw
I'll
your.
send you an email.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, and moving on to the BoxAm tournament. So this is coming up in early February in Spain. Just a reminder that we had the published selection criteria, so top 16 finish at the World Championships from last season, and a competitive readiness evaluation. And the competitive readiness evaluation is basically, are you healthy? Have we seen a YTP for you where we see that this, like your coach is programming this in and preparing you adequately and giving you some rest in the time off after? For priority 2, it's evaluation of performances of elite nationals and potentially the elite national team camp that's going on now. Although because the timeline is so crunched, we thought we were going to have another few weeks, unfortunately, but we don't. I doubt we'll be making any decisions to add anyone to the tour because it's just not going to happen. Like the registration's already in. But based on how athletes do in the team camp that's coming up next week, we might say, hey, your competitive readiness evaluation is not adequate. Like we're taking you off the team. And then we've got judgment of the HPD available as a criteria. And I think we executed on that once with the number of athletes who we're bringing. So with coaches who are going, I believe we've got Samir, we've got Vincent, and who's our female coach who's going? Andrienne, help me out here.
Sorry, yes, to BoxAm,
Yeah.
Danielle and Ariane.
Yes, great. So we've got two female coaches going as well. We do have a pretty large team who are going, so we want to make sure that we've got adequate coverage. So the athletes who made criteria, right? We've listed off here. It's a pretty ugly slide. I apologize, but we want to continue this practice of being really transparent about how athletes are actually making criteria and how they're being selected. And a reminder, CRE, competitive readiness evaluation. And we do know that unfortunately Parminder he qualified. We're really excited to have him come. Unfortunately, he is injured right now and has declined his spot. And based on unfortunately when he declined, we didn't have enough time working with the organizing committee to make a change for registration. So we won't have a men's 75 going to this event. Okay, and we're going to move on from there and talk about the next big thorn in our side, which is our Youth Olympic Games qualifier happening in Thailand in March. So we'll jump to the fun bits of this. So this event, if you are going to go to the Youth Olympic Games, or if you want to qualify for the Youth Olympic Games, you have to appear at this event, and that's a world boxing international qualification standard that they put into place. The wrinkle in this is we do not know how many spots we have at the Youth Olympic Games. We have 10 spots available to us at the qualifier in Thailand. But it could be that we have someone medal at the Youth Olympic Games qualifier in Thailand. And we have another athlete medal at the qualifier in Thailand. And we have another medal and another medal and another medal. But yet we say we have 5 gold medalists, but we only have 4, maybe 3, potentially just 2 spots at the Youth Olympic Games. This is not a fair situation. No one is saying that it is. No one likes it, but it is the reality that we're in. So we've got the selection for this event in Thailand going on right now at the camp. So we're selecting through results of the camp. And we will have a very hard conversation with all of the coaches and all the athletes and all their parents to say, look, if you are interested in going to Thailand because it's going to be a great competitive opportunity in and of itself, that's a great reason to go to Thailand. But if you're going to Thailand because you're thinking you're going to get a spot to go to the Youth Olympic Games by just showing up in Thailand, that is a bad strategy, right? And you have to understand that we might have 10 spots available, but we might only have 2. So everyone needs to understand that. And we've done the math 100 ways till Sunday. It is an expensive tour. And the $3,500 that is the tour fee is us heavily subsidizing this tour. Okay. It is not cheap to get there. It is not cheap to stay there. And unfortunately, this is just the reality we're in. So I want everyone to understand you got to be comfortable paying $3,500 to go to Thailand and have a competitive experience in Thailand. I also want to be clear. The event in Thailand is a youth category, not just a Youth Olympic Games age category, because the Youth Olympic Games category is quite prescriptive and it's a smaller subset of the regular youth age category in boxing. It's a subset of the U19 category. So there will be local countries, local to Thailand, so Thailand and the surrounding nations, will probably be putting in a whole bunch of youth-aged athletes, not just Youth Olympic Games aged athletes. So we are specifically just sending Youth Olympic Games aged athletes to this event, right? So I also want everyone to understand that as well. Okay, moving on from there. Yeah, so I've delved into this a little bit. The Youth Olympic Games, the actual Youth Olympic Games tour, right? So we don't know how big the team will be. We just know what the age group will be. We know that you have to be selected, and we know that we know the weight classes that we have, and based on the athletes who are of Youth Olympic Games age, who we have here at the camp in Montreal, we know that we will not be filling all of the women's spots because there are some age groups, age or weight classes, sorry, that we just don't have anyone of the appropriate age. But we will attempt to send the biggest team we possibly can to the Youth Olympic Games. I think it's a great experience. I was privileged enough to be a coach at the first ever Winter Olympic Games in 2012. And it was a fantastic event. The athletes who I took there with the biathlon team had a great time, and 3 out of 4 of them went on to be part of the national team, and one of them went on to go to the actual Olympics. I'm not suggesting that there is a direct pathway between the Youth Olympic Games and the actual Olympic Games, but it is a great opportunity to experience at a young age your first international multi-nation, multi-sport event, right? Because you'll be part of the Canadian team with the archers and the water polo team and track and field and everybody else. Like, it is a big, big deal. So a fun time, and a great experience, but we need to remember we may only have a limited number of starts. So looking ahead to nationals. So just a reminder, 18th to 21st in Calgary. It is a direct selection event for the U19 World Championship. So if you get a gold medal at the U19s, you will be offered a spot on the U19 World Championships team. If you are second place at the U19 Nationals and the person ahead of you doesn't accept their spot, then you could still be going to U19 Worlds. We only have one start per weight class at U19 Worlds, unfortunately. We also don't know where that is yet. We're waiting on World Boxing to confirm. Our suspicions is that that event, or best guesses, I should say, for that event is it will be late August into September for the U19 Worlds. And we suspect it will be in Europe or Asia, but that's pretty much all we know at this point. Speaking back specifically about U19, or sorry, nationals for U17, U19, U23s, a reminder of a few things. The first is it's co-hosted with the Canada Cup. That's an open tournament. So if you have athletes who don't qualify for the U17 nationals or the U19 nationals or the U23 nationals, there is a whole open tournament there available for them to also be there and competing. So it's just another multi-day tournament opportunity for people across Canada and the Americas. And we also have, and I mentioned it before, the Indigenous novice event called the Fighting Spirit competition. Novice only, direct matchups, and a great opportunity for first competitive experiences in an Indigenous only environment. What I didn't say earlier is if you have any, or you know of any Indigenous referees and judges, we are looking for the opportunity to just have Indigenous RJs there as well running the tournament. So we're happy to support that happening. We've got a little bit of money set aside by the government of Canada to support us in this. So we would see that as an opportunity to both use those RJs, but also, have an educational experience for them as well, because we'll have the resources available to help. Okay. Right. Next slide. So talking a little bit about training volume. So just a reminder for everyone, right after our January camp last year, we invited all of our identified athletes to use a Google Sheet tool to provide us with training data. And we had fantastic data coming in for about 4 months, and then people started getting a little weary of it. And I don't blame you. Writing down training is not the most fun thing to do in the world, but it is important. And we shared this data with sort of our physiologists here at the National Training Center and some data scientists, and they were able to do some manipulation and based on the limited data set that we had. We did have data from a number of athletes that went all the way through the year, but the vast majority of data that we got was from the first 4 months. And we're going to sort of dissect a little bit of that over the next couple minutes. So first is we divided those types of training into 6 different areas. So technical, conditioning, recovery, sparring, competition, and meetings. And we can see by far, we were classifying that training as technical. So, just over 50% of the training. Then the next biggest, I've actually got people's faces over that, was, of course, conditioning. and then looking down to sparring, and that's we called sparring open sparring. If it was technical sparring, we sort of called it technical work, but open sparring at 10% of the recorded hours, and then recovery activities, competition, and then meeting time. So it was interesting to see that breakdown, and I'll share some thoughts on that in a second or two. When we look at each of the athletes who was sending us a significant amount of data, this is a little difficult to understand because it's not actually a time series. What it is each one of these vertical bars represents one athlete. And the average weekly hours recorded by type of activity and what did that total up to in the total number of hours trained. And so we were taking sort of an athlete's best 4 or 5 weeks of training, where we felt that they were recording an accurate or as close to an accurate amount of training as they possibly did within their personal data set. And then we were inferring from that what sort of average training would look like for an entire year. And we can see that quite a number of athletes are sort of averaging between, let's say, roughly 6 and 8 hours of training per week. And that breakdown for most of those athletes is remarkably similar, looking at technical to sparring to recovery, meeting, conditioning, competition, to what we saw in that first pie graph of all athletes. Okay. When we look at volume of training, as opposed to sort of as a percentage of the training that was done, I see a fair bit of variation, but I certainly see that pattern coming through strongly, that technical is really valued. Although I will say there were a number of athletes who, based on what they were submitting, were pretty heavy on sparring. And we certainly see that at the far end of the graph, but I'm not sure that that's representative. And then we see that on a few athletes through the middle. What I was impressed with was the number of athletes who were reporting doing some sort of meeting activity regularly, very likely with their coach, to make sure that they were fully understanding what they were doing for training, giving proper feedback to their coach, having good discussions with their coach about how things should be happening. It's not a huge amount of time that was dedicated to it, but we see it regularly through this group of athletes who are regularly reporting into us. So that was a nice takeaway. When we look overall at this data set, I have some personal observations and some personal things that I think need some action. And the first is we looked for evidence of periodization in the recorded information. And it's different. Recorded versus what was programmed by the coach can often be quite different, right? When you see a perfect YTP and you see, over a 4-week period, a nice ramp up in the intensity and volume, and then there's a recovery week, and then there's another ramp up, and then a recovery week. Like, it's really easy to make that happen on the planned training, but it's very difficult for across sports to see that actually come out in the actual hours recorded by athletes. And it was quite clear in the vast majority of athletes, we were not seeing any evidence of periodization coming through in what was actually being done. So that was concerning. Okay. I would also suggest that for athletes who are looking to be successful in an international focus, we weren't seeing a sufficient number of hours being recorded. Now, that there's a difference between hours recorded and hours that are actually trained, right? So we can only deal with what we've got recorded in the data set. So this is not a universal, but it was like 6 hours a week is not sufficient to be an international world-class athlete, right? Chris?
Oh, I'm a data geek. I'll keep talking.
Yeah. Yeah. And then just other observations. So I was surprised that there weren't as many recorded recovery activities. And I think I think a lot of this stems with the quality of the recording as opposed to necessarily the quality of training, right? But when I look at the recorded data, not enough recovery activities. And related to that is, I'll drop down a little bit, low rates of reported cross training, right? So I think people are going out and, playing a little bit of soccer, playing some pickup basketball, right? Going for jogs, right? Going for a long hike on their day off, right? I think people are doing it, but they weren't recording it down into the data set. I will also say that of the recorded data, we were surprised that conditioning appeared to be at a lower percentage of the overall training that was being done than we had anticipated. And within the conditioning that was being done, it was very often, in our mind, insufficient, right? So it wasn't high enough quality. It seemed to be, and I will take some flack maybe for using this terminology, but I would suggest it was garbage training. The hours were being done, but I don't think there was enough thought into what was being done for the conditioning, right? There wasn't a lot of intentionality in the training that we were seeing. And part of the data reporting was an opportunity for people to actually write down like a little bit of detail about what they actually did, not just I did 1 hour of a certain intensity. There was a high volume of sparring. Now, this one was interesting because I think there is a tendency to record higher volumes of sparring compared to other things. So what I think we're seeing here is, as a percentage, we were seeing sparring peak up simply because there was better recording of sparring, because it's more exciting to write down the amount of time that I'm spending sparring than it is the amount of time that I'm doing sit-ups, right? And then one of the interesting patterns that we saw was this variation between athletes in the same club at a similar weight class and in similar programming, where we were seeing vastly different reports about what was actually being done in training. And again, I think a lot of that is coming back to, we had some people who are really into recording, and then a lot of other people who are not good at recording. So again, we can only deal with the data that we've got. So my takeaways: poor record keeping. We need to find a way to both teach our athletes how to do record keeping, but also incentivize them to do that record keeping. And I would suggest that I see evidence based on the data of a poor understanding of the principles and methodology of training. And I think this is where we need to go back to maybe we are not prioritizing the CAC courses that could be giving us a little bit more insight into this early enough in the coaching curriculum. I also think that maybe we need to have an athlete-focused online education opportunity to learn a little bit about the principles of training, the very basic stuff. But given the type of workout that's being recorded and the way it was being recorded, it was quite clear to our physiologists that they just don't get what they're doing. They're doing stuff, they're doing work, they're doing hard work, but the intentionality and the specificity of the training was lacking. So, Chris, some comments.
Yeah, any difference between the centralized athletes and the ones training from home?
Yeah, so we're talking specifically about the decentralized athletes.
Okay.
And I will say the centralized athletes have some major advantages. So one, we know that the coach-athlete ratio is way, way different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, in this environment, you've got a 6 athlete to 1 coach ratio. And during some practices, it's an even better ratio because we've also got the strength coach there. We've also got the physiologist there, right? So there's that. There's also, we don't allow people to leave the centralized training environment until they've written down what they did today, right? And part of that is because we've got heart rate monitors on them. We're experimenting with not just wearing heart rate monitors here because it's a pain in the butt, and it doesn't feel very good when you get punched directly in the heart rate monitor. right? So we're now doing things like putting them on armbands and putting them on
Right.
calf bands. And we're starting experiments where we're going to have them, the actual heart rate monitor piece is an optical sensor instead of an electromagnetic sensor that could actually be built into the waistband of shorts
Mm.
and could be built into our boots that we're wearing during training, right? So like anything we can do to make it easier and just have to turn on and start training and then stop training, like one button on, one button off, and then have the computer figure out, okay, was that working in the gym, or was that doing heavy sparring, open sparring, or were you doing bag work, or right, like the sensors are sophisticated enough they can start to pull that information out. And again, in the centralized environment, we've got a physiologist who looks at all that data and can line it up against the actual training that they saw that day and say, yeah, that was about 52 minutes of intense work. And then it was another 70 minutes of less intense work. And the less intense work was technical work with partnering on the bags and the right, like we can help to fill in the details. So
Okay.
there are
But
advantages of that. But if we can bring some of that technology down a level, then I think we could really improve the recording.
even the centralized athletes were only doing 8 hours a week.
No, the centralized athletes, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. I would suggest that
Okay.
they're doing significantly more than that.
Okay.
So,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. Did any correlation between hours and type of training that can be and outcomes?
So we weren't measuring that with this data set.
Okay.
And I would suggest that the athletes, and this is anecdotal completely,
Hmm.
but knowing the names of the athletes and what was being recorded, in general, the athletes who were super recorders were typically doing better at a national level. I would suggest they are also prototypically female, and they're also prototypically athletes who are also students who are registered in post-secondary education, right?
Okay.
So, and I don't think any of that is like groundbreaking observation,
Oh,
but looking at the listed names compared to who the super recorders were within the data set, I would say that. I would say
and
that they are probably maybe not doing better in sort of like their peak during the season as competitors, but they're regularly at competition, showing up to more competitions during the year, and they were competing through the entire year if they
mm,
were a super recorder, as opposed to athletes who maybe um, started off the season really well, had a few major competitions, and then kind of drifted off over the summer and then sort of worked at getting back up and ready to go to nationals again at the end of the year.
okay.
Those are the kind of athletes who are definitely not super recorders.
And I presume for the decentralized athletes, it was up to their personal coaches to provide a periodization plan.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And
But the
we were checking with them to make sure that there was a proper YTP in place.
okay,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
cool.
And like I said, a lot of this comes down to the type of record keeping that's available to us and the data that's collected. So we know there's a gap here. So,
Okay.
and that leads nicely into this conversation. So we were looking at those decentralized athletes in boxing at the U23 and elite level, recording 200 to 400 boxing specific hours of training per year. We know that that's lower than the actuals, right? It is quite obvious by just knowing who was in that group that they're doing more than 200 to 400 hours. But then when we look at and we accept that, and your question about what is the centralized athlete pool doing, I would
Hmm.
suggest that in total volume of training, they're between 475 up to 650, okay, in
Okay.
recorded hours. And there's probably some additional training going on, particularly in recovery activities or cross training, that they are still not recording. So it may be slightly higher than that. But I think I would be surprised if we had anyone who was actually executing more than 700 hours of training. And 700 hours of training in a combat sport, that's a lot of hits, right? You got to be very careful about how you're managing your sparring versus your other types of training. And I would probably suggest that as you get over 400 hours, the percentage of sparring that we're seeing would
Goes
go
down.
down and down and down and down and down, because I think there is a finite volume, a number of hours of sparring that you can do. And there is certainly a finite load of sparring that you can do. Load being your volume times your intensity, right? So how much impact does that training have on the athlete? Literally impact in our sport. When we compare total volumes to other sports, so I mean, I've got a background with biathlon, so of course that was easy for me to get, and those guys are doing between 700 and 1,000. Sprint canoe kayak was interesting, most interesting because their primary recording metric isn't actually hours of training, it's kilometers paddled. And they were a little unique in that, because I compare that against rowing, and rowing did not have that distinction. So I thought that was interesting. Triathlon, their normative data is that, it's a volume sport. Like, that's not surprising that it's going to be quite high. And then these three last stats were when we looked at sort of metadata level and said, what has like the Canadian Olympic Committee sort of published at about their Olympic athletes and what they do. Same thing with USA, and same thing with the United Kingdom. And remarkably similar, this 700 to 1,000, and that's across all sports. So you're going to get some sports where we know that the volume will be a little lower, and some sports where we know the volume will be a little higher. But interesting that exists. The only peer-reviewed studies that we could find of modern, like within the last 3 years, training loads within boxing were suggesting between 400 and 500 boxing specific hours of training per year. But they were not, and they were quite candid that they were not counting non-boxing specific. So no cross-training activities, and not necessarily even recovery activities. It was difficult for us to really tease out what does that turn into in total training. But in total training, I would suggest that having a target of between 500 and 650 for mature athletes is probably a good goal. And I would also suggest that anyone who's looking to increase their yearly volume by more than 50 hours year over year is probably setting themselves up for failure. And I think you're probably increasing your risk of injury significantly. And two, that's a big jump, right? An extra hour per week doesn't sound like much until you actually do an extra hour per week. And it just becomes difficult to maintain, more than an extra hour per week. So one of the
extra hour of boxing specific, or an extra hour of, let's
I would say
over?
boxing of actual training and total training, right? And it doesn't sound like much, but when you're already doing 8 to 12 hours of training per week, it becomes a lot. And I think we also need to be cognizant that, let's face it, we don't do an equal number of hours per week every single week of the year for 52 weeks a year, right?
Right.
And for sports that I'm intimately aware of, like sprint canoe kayak, biathlon, and triathlon, I mean, the biathlon team takes an entire month off, right? And they're still active, but they're not training, right? So they're still accumulating hours, but they're accumulating like 5 hours, 10 hours maybe, instead of having training weeks where some of those training weeks are up at 20, 25 hours in their high volume periods. right? So again, that periodization needs to be in that training plan.
And we're also assuming that adding 50 hours, you're already at the top of the threshold. You're at the 8 hour a week, and turning 8 to 9 is a big deal, but turning 5 to 6 is not, I
Yeah.
presume.
Yeah, and I would also suggest that um, if you're an athlete who has been gradually, since age 12, moving up at say 25 to 40 hours per week addition over your career, like you're going to be on a nice gentle curve where you're able to handle that increase. It hasn't been a major lifestyle disruptor, right? You haven't sustained any major injuries, and like that'll be fine. And if everyone could program themselves from 12 years old up, then that would be really easy. But if we've already got like a U23 athlete who hasn't had a lot of international success yet, and they're looking to make the jump from 400 hours to 500 hours, that's going to be a real hard go. Right. And I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm just saying like you better really be careful about how you're doing it. And the way to increase that training load is definitely not to increase the sparring that you're doing. By the time you're in a competitive club program in Canada that is doing a good job of providing the right volume of sparring at the right time of year with the right partners, you're not going to increase your fitness by increasing the amount of sparring you're going to do, right? You're going to increase your fitness by increasing all the non-sparring activity that you're doing, right? And probably adding a couple 5K runs that you weren't doing 3 times a week, or adding, 2 long bike rides a week. Like that's the thing that's going to make a huge difference in your physiological training, right? Your technical training is something that, let's face it, boxing coaches are pretty good at teaching people how to box, right? Like that's not a concern. We know that we're able to do those technical education pieces. So, um, so looking at conclusions here, and this is bringing in that centralized, non-centralized thing a little bit, I'm suggesting, I think we're likely under documenting our training. I don't think that's a that's a that's a surprise to anyone. I think the training sophistication is lower than it needs to be. And I'm not suggesting it's necessary that I'm looking at the overall training sophistication. The training sophistication within the technical work, I think, is quite sophisticated because I see it when I go to different clubs. But I think the overall training sophistication is low. I would suggest that the decentralized athletes are undertrained in conditioning compared to the centralized athletes. I feel pretty confident in saying that. I would suggest that all Boxing Canada athletes, and decentralized and centralized, are insufficiently cross-training. Okay, and finding ways to combat this idea that we need to be as specialized as we can possibly be is challenging, right? Especially because we know that you need to specialize in boxing to a degree, but that's not to the exclusion of also going out and regularly playing soccer, or going on long bike rides, or being also a runner, or getting into paddling, or like something completely different, right? That is testing your physiological training in a slightly different way. And then again, this note about the education level about within our athletes and coaches about the ins and outs of the physiological training, I think, is something that we need to find a solution for. So the national team and Boxing Canada are going to work on this a little bit and see what we may be able to do, and certainly take away some of the lessons that we're learning in the centralized environment, like how can we make it easy to record training and not have to be a complete training nerd in order to write down everything all the time. How can we make it easy on people to collect this data and then be able to use this data in a meaningful way to improve what they're doing? So, okay. So that's a bit of a deep dive, and I hope we got something out of that. But we thank everyone for providing that training data, and anyone who wants to continue using that tool, we certainly encourage them to, because we do think it's helpful. But there are a whole bunch of other tools out there to record data. So I don't feel roped into using that one specifically. Anyway, anyone who wants to have a side conversation about that, I am a nerd about these things and I'm happy to engage. I want to quickly go over sort of upcoming dates here. And the big ones that we added into this are just sort of this B tour versus A tour. So I highlight that BoxAm is sort of an A and B tour. We've got two starts in a lot of those weight classes, so that's no issues there. On our B tour, that's the GB tournament in Finland, Eindhoven in the Netherlands, and the Copa Americana in July. And of course, we've got sort of our nationals coming up. We've got the World Cup in Brazil and the World Cup in China that are coming up for the A Tour. And then just a reminder to everyone that change dates for our elite nationals compared to what we had previously published, now being slightly earlier in November. And I want to make sure that everyone is clear on that, because I am a little worried that plans for provincials may be impacted by this. So I bring it up early just to make sure that we've got enough time. And the other thing is we are going to have to adjust our early bird registration to make sure that we're not accidentally putting the early bird registration at a point where no one can access it because you had to wait until your provincials were over, right? So we will put some thought into that and make sure that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot, let's say. See, I've been talking about biathlon a little bit, so now I'm into the shooting metaphors. Okay, and our next HP update happening in late February. It's quite late February, being a short month. And reminder that all of our previous updates, we've got the slide packages available for people to take a look at. And we've got sort of a dashboard of all of our committee advisory and update meetings available for everyone. And of course, these videos are available for people to watch or listen to in the background on our YouTube channel. So thank you, everyone, for your attention. And I'm going to stop the recording. And Chris, if you have any other questions, we can hit those once I've figured out how to stop recording. There we go.